Okay, this is my 16th or 17th attempt now to record this video. Hopefully YouTube will not screw up on me today like it has. I can get this right. This is David Hansel, aka Dancing Bear. And this is a social commentary of sorts. Basically, this is about a trend, not a trend, excuse me, some elements we see in the New Age movement. Not so much among pagans and Wiccans. Part of that might be because a lot of pagans and Wiccans tend to snub the New Age movement a little bit. Others see a lot of value in it. I happen to be one of those that sees a lot of value in it. And but there is something that comes up now and then. A little bit kind of a resistance to the darkness, one might say. But you'll see these things pop up. Postings, and some from very famous comments from famous people. If something doesn't serve you anymore in your life, it's time to let it go. If someone doesn't serve you anymore in your life, it's time to cut it off with them. That relationship just no longer serves you. That friendship no longer serves you. There's another one I'm trying to think of. I can't remember what it was now. But anyway, you get the gist of it. Those type of things. Oh yeah, you don't have to explain why you're leaving. You don't have to explain. These might be some interesting things. Some people say, "Oh yeah, I never thought of it that way." Well, you know why you never thought of it that way? Because it's bunk. There's an old saying. Excuse me, just a second here. I want to get a prop to show something here. There's an old story about the Zen master or Taoist master, what you want to say, is talking to the student, and the student's just like, well, you're going to show me this, you're going to show me this, what about this, what about this, what about this? And he's pouring a cup of tea, and the tea overflows. It says, and the student's saying, well, master, my cup is full, it's overflowing. He says, exactly, just like your mind. How can I teach you anything when your mind is so full of questions and facts? Empty your mind, just as you empty the cup. Well, I don't like that illustration because if you empty your cup, what's it going to be filled with? It could be the finest wine, it could be the deadliest poison. It could be some Pinot Noir or hemlock tea. So, the illustration I like to use is this, and this is one that's done right too. The dream catcher. For those of you who know about the dream catchers, the idea was that the webbing, a proper dream catcher has a hole in the middle. Some only have tiny holes, some have a nice big one like this one. And the proper idea of the dream catcher, this is properly made. The idea of the dream catcher is that the webbing would catch the bad dreams, the opening would let the good dreams through. Now, the way I like to use this as an illustration is that the opening is our open mind, allowing new information to come in, but at the same time we have this webbing. Webbing is our previous knowledge and our common sense, and that basically collects all the bullshit, prevents that from getting into our mind. So, that's something to think about when we hear these ideas. But yet we tend to want to go with them. Is it just because we're being sheepish? Being like sheep, just following? Well, in some cases maybe, but I think there's also something else. It's the group I go to Saturday mornings called One God, One Breath. Some people might call it a church. I call it a philosophical group. It was established by a man named Little Crow. Follow his teachings, which are the Lakota Way, the Red Road, basically Native American worldview. And one of the tenets of the group, is that everything has a predatory self-interest. everyone has a predatory self-interest. Now that sounds bad, and does almost like we're all out to get each other, and that's the way we should be. And that's not what it means at all. There is that aspect of it. That's the shadow side of it, and there's a good side to it. I mean, obviously, part of having that survivor spirit, uh, that survival instinct, is having a predatory self-interest. And we always want to put ourselves and our families first before we try to help other people. Take care of your own first. Well, the shadow side of that, of course, is putting your own interests ahead of other people, and damage those people. Alcoholics are practicing predatory self-interest. They want to get their inebriation on the expense of friends and relatives. Drug addicts would be another good example. A gentleman at One God, One Breath once gave the example of, I guess he was at a senior center, and this elderly gentleman who had a stroke that left his left arm paralyzed was trying to eat a pudding cup or something of that nature. I'll say it was a pudding cup. And this woman, just automatically, kind of intervened and said, "Oh, here, let me help you." And he said, "No, I've got this." He then, with his good hand, he took his left arm and plopped it on the table, with the hand open, shoved the pudding cup into that open hand, and then ate out of it with his good hand. He was self-sufficient, and he wanted to be left alone to be self-sufficient. She was a little bit offended that he wouldn't let her. She said, "Oh, I was just trying to help." Well, that's a good example of predatory self-interest. She was trying to help to make herself feel good, not respecting his wishes or the fact that he may actually be capable of doing it himself. She should have just waited until he asked, or asked ahead, "Do you need some help?" And left it at that. But no, she just automatically stepped in and is presumed to help him. That's exercising predatory self-interest. Another example, guys can relate, and women, listen up. Guys, this never happened to me in high school. It did happen to me in college a couple of times, and since then, and I think it happens to a lot of guys, and throughout adult life. You like someone, you like a woman, you like a girl. The feelings aren't the same, but they like you as a person. They like you as a friend, and that's okay too. Nothing wrong with having that friendship after that, or even after a relationship. But what they do is they try to set you up with one of their friends, possibly even a sister or a cousin. Stop it. Stop the matchmaking. It doesn't work. The guy gets the feeling that you're just trying to push him off on someone else. And you know why? Because that's exactly what you're doing. Now you may think, well, I just want him to be happy. I want my friend to be happy too. My other friend, they'd be good together. Well, you're doing it. So what are you doing? You're really doing it to make yourself feel good. Predatory self-interest. So that's why we're inclined to go along with these thoughts and these feelings. And there are times when it's correct to just end the relationship abruptly. Something of that nature. And sorry, my cat did something crazy. Anyway, yes, abusive relationships, of course. And sometimes, whether it be physical or emotional even, a lot of people have to get out very suddenly. And you should still tell the person why you left. Probably not a good idea to do it in person. May not be a good idea even to do it over the phone, but at least an email or a letter. And sometimes they're not even aware of what they've been doing until that time. But it's also closure for you. And also, moving along, well, if it's an amicable breakup, well, then it should be done in person. The only exception to that rule is if there's a distance separating it. Then it should be done over telephone. The person deserves to have that connection, of that more personal connection, hearing voice inflections and so forth, and you need to be able to hear that person. And if as a last resort, an email or a letter, yes, but that's very impersonal. And also consider doing a departure ritual, a separation ritual. Both people have to be in agreement on it, of course, for both of them to do it. If one of them is not agreeable to it, then the other person could always just do one on their own, just for a little bit of closure. But keep in mind, you will always be connected to that person because everything is connected. Everyone is connected. And you've already strengthened that connection a little bit. So you're going to have a stronger connection with that person than other people in the world. You always will, even if it weakens a little bit. So we know why we do it, and there are times to do it. But how does this come up into New Age thought? Where does it come from? Where does it stem from? Well, it can pretty much trace back to a philosopher of the late 50s and early 60s. I say that because that's about the time she was probably the most prominent or got the most attention, I think. She was getting attention before that. Her name was Ayn Rand. I believe that's how it's pronounced. Aynrand. I always want to call her Anne, but it's Ayn. And this is a woman who wrote some modern classics, The Fountainhead, Atlas Shrugged, among others. She was outspoken, a philosopher, female philosopher at that time, when a lot of people in this country still thought women should be in the, barefoot, pregnant in the kitchen. So kudos to her for doing that, and speaking her mind. But if you take that gender part out of it, she was an egomaniac, a narcissist, and believed in selfishness. People see her as a champion of individualism. Well, basically, she was a champion of selfishness. And, she tried to cloak that philosophy in the guise of individualism, therefore justifying it. Some things she said was pretty good. Some of her quotes. Got one up here in a second. Now, this is individual rights are not subject to a public vote. A majority has no right to vote away the rights of a minority. The political function of rights is precisely to protect minorities from oppression by majorities, and the smallest minority on earth is the individual. Well, that's really good, especially considering what happened here in California a while back with Proposition 8. That shows right there that should not have happened. People didn't have the right to vote on that, taking the rights away of the minority. But she overlooks the fact of what is a minority. We think of minorities as being racial minorities, sometimes gender or age. Get into it as well. But there's another minority that's come up in the news. In fact, the term has become quite commonplace. The 1%. That's a minority. But it's an elite minority. So she's saying that we should protect the rights of elitists as well. Well, if the person, the individual happens to be the dictator, protect his rights or the rights of the majority or the rights of people. She's basically, like I said, trying to disguise self-centeredness, selfishness as individualism. In doing so, she basically attacks altruism. She's completely against altruism. Now, what is altruism? Okay, another read. Altruism is the principle or practice of concern for the welfare of others. Doesn't sound so bad, does it? It is a traditional virtue in many cultures and a core aspect of various religious traditions. But the concept of others toward whom concern should be directed can vary among cultures and religions. Altruism is the opposite of selfishness. Like I said, that doesn't sound so bad, does it? Well, let's see how Ayn Rand defines it. Just double checking here because YouTube is acting funny. I guess we're okay. So far, so good. So, Ayn Rand on altruism. What is the moral code of altruism? The basic principle of altruism is that man has no right to exist for his own sake, that service to others is the only justification of his existence, and that self-sacrifice self-sacrifice is his highest moral duty, virtue, and value. Do not confuse altruism with kindness, goodwill, or respect for the rights of others. These are not primaries, but consequences, which in fact altruism makes impossible. The reducible primary of altruism, the basic absolute, is self-sacrifice, which means self-immolation, self-abnegation, self-denial, self-destruction, which means the self as a standard of evil and the selfless as a standard of the good. Yeah. You see that she basically twists the definition of altruism around to make it sound something bad. Self-sacrifice would be part of altruism, but it's not a necessary part of altruism. Like I don't, like I said before, take care of your own, take care of your family before you take care of others. Yeah, you do need to do that. Otherwise, you're not going to be around to take care of others. You're not going to be able to. But if a person chooses some self-sacrifice, that's up to them. Now, self-sacrifice is abused sometimes. Yes, it is. When governments send people to war, especially when it's a war for profit and for government interests or corporate interests, as we see nowadays for the most part. Then yeah, it's definitely wrong. Others take advantage of it. But that doesn't make altruism in general wrong. It means the distortion of altruism is wrong. And yet that's exactly what Ayn Rand does here. She distorts altruism. As it says in the official definition, it's the opposite of selfishness. So she's advocating selfishness. She even wrote a piece called The Virtue of Selfishness. Now, I'm very much into Eastern philosophy, and there's a lot of paradoxes in Eastern philosophy. I believe there are a lot of paradoxes in life, but this is not a paradox. It is a contradiction. There is no virtue in selfishness. Self-love is good, as long as it's not narcissism, is that you don't get ego in the way. Self-confidence is good. Taking care of the self is good. But selfishness, hoarding yourself, your own talents and abilities and so forth, away from others, Yet that's what she's advocating. And when it comes to contradictions, let's talk about seeing other things. This is an interesting quote. Because I'm sure people pointed out these contradictions to her. What was her answer? Contradictions do not exist. Whenever you think you are facing a contradiction, check your premises. You will find that one of them is wrong. Well, in other words, I'm right, you're wrong. That's all there is to it. You're an idiot, I'm a genius. Ego, narcissism. That's what Ayn Rand was about. There's also a story of this to illustrate this in real life practices. She had a disciple of sorts, someone who was a follower of her philosophies and so forth, and really respected her. And he got to meet her one day in her home. I think he was doing an interview with her or something like that. Well, she was taken by this younger man. she seduced him in her own home, with her husband in the home. She liked that little tryst, so she told him to come back. Bring the guy she had the tryst with had a wife or a fiance, I forget which. I think she was a fiance. Come back with her. Ayn Rand called her husband into this little meeting. They explained that her and this gentleman had a tryst, and she liked it, and she thought it'd be a good idea if they did it like once a week, and proceeded to explain to the others how it would benefit them, convince them to agree. Eventually, the guy's fiance left him. Big surprise. And her husband, I forget, either died of alcoholism, was an alcoholic, drank himself to death, or committed suicide, or something of that nature. It was a very sad story. That's the type of thing effect that her own selfishness had on people around her. There's also stories of people who followed her philosophy of abandoning their families, men who abandoned their families because it suited their own self-interest, because they became so selfish. They didn't want to sacrifice anymore. And so women who did the same thing. Not that there's anything wrong with individual freedom and following your dreams and so forth, but you got to take care of your responsibilities too. You don't abandon your family to do so, or even your friends for that matter, necessarily, unless they are so against you. That's the only way you're going to do it. And then you have to make a choice, and you need to consider that choice a great deal, because sometimes some friends aren't worth losing. But then again, sometimes it's not worth giving if you're doing for them either. So, what's this have to do with the New Age movement? Well, that gentleman I mentioned went on to write some self-help books, and so did a lot of other people who followed Ayn Rand. That's what kind of led to the New Age movement. A lot of self-help books. And of course, other authors and so forth balance things out, saw that element of selfishness in there and so forth, and tended to balance things out a bit. Dan Millman, in a way, the peaceful warrior, I don't think he was really influenced by Ayn Rand at all. Might have been a little bit, but there's a part where Socrates, for those of you who never read the book or saw the movie, he meets a gas station attendant who's very wise and he's very wise and very knowledgeable of philosophy and so forth, and has his own life philosophy. And Dan Millman nicknamed him Socrates. So anyway, there's a point where Socrates tells him, Dan Millman chastises him, so well, you work in a service station, big deal. He says, I work in a service station. I offer service. There is no higher calling. So that's something to consider. And we can all be in service to each other. It doesn't necessarily mean servitude. I've been in customer service field for many years, and the expectations people have of customer service agents are not very real a lot of times. What they think of as customer service is not real. The customer is not always right. I worked for Terminix for a while, and I didn't think much of them as a company, but one policy they had was right on the money. The customer is not always right, but they are always the customer. And that's what I try to explain to people. Just because you're not always right doesn't mean you get treated like dirt if you're a customer. But the customer is not always right. Why? Because nobody is always right. Nobody is always right. So customers aren't always right. And the problem is that a lot of people will treat people in customer service or even counter service and so forth just like the gum on their shoe or something. That's because they forget there's a difference between service and servitude. Nothing wrong with service. Servitude, something else. Now, the fact that this did get into the New Age movement, a lot of people have been able to balance that out. A lot of writers, a lot of authors. But that element's still there, that little dark element of Ayn Rand's philosophy. We need to be aware of that. And if something comes up that sounds just like, something about individualism, we have to stop and think, well, is that really good? Or is that selfish? Is it kind or is it cruel? And they say, well, if it's cruel, that's just the other person, that's their problem because of their perspective and so forth. Well, you know what? Yeah, they can get over it after a while, but on the other hand, why give them something they have to get over to begin with? If we're kind, we can avoid that sometimes. Sometimes it's unavoidable, but still we can soften the blow. If we soften the blow a little bit, offer to be their friend, then, yeah, it helps them get over it a little bit. But just by saying, well, they don't serve us, they don't serve me anymore, they don't serve anymore. What's that about anyway? Ideally, we're in life to serve each other. We should be serving each other. But sometimes that's not the case. Someone comes in our life and they're to serve a purpose for us. You know what? Sometimes it's the other way around. We're not supposed to, they're not in our life to serve a purpose for us. They're in our life because we're supposed to be serving a purpose for them. And one more note on self-sacrifice. How many parents wouldn't sacrifice for their kids? I'm losing some sunlight. Clouds going by. How many parents wouldn't sacrifice themselves for the children? Well, unfortunately, these days in the news we hear a lot about that, but I venture to say the majority of parents would not think twice about sacrificing their life for their children's life, or sacrificing some part of their life for the betterment of their children, or the joy of their children. Or even your spouse, for instance. The shooting that happened in Colorado in a movie theater not too long ago. There were 3 young men who died because they put themselves between their girlfriend and the bullets. Their girlfriends were spared. Now, according to Ayn Rand, those young men should have sat there and let their girlfriends die. That's the type of person Ayn Rand was. Now, other people are going to say, oh, no, she wasn't like that. People just misunderstand it. Well, go back and read it again. Go back and read her stuff again. Go back and like I said, she basically twisted things around to suit her purpose. There's an old scripture or old saying that the devil can quote scripture to suit his purpose because he's twisting the meanings around, taking things out of context. And that's what Ayn Rand did. Very overrated in terms of her philosophy. But I will say this again. Kudos to her for being a woman who spoke her mind. So, that's my thought on this. Finally got this video done because YouTube did not screw me up. Take care. Have a good day.